The mysterious Mr. Enter reviewed The Legend of Korra Book 1, and I thought it would bring balance to the four elements. But I just got burned. But it's okay. I have something to cure burns. I have aloe vera. What's up, you piles of human filth? It's Dr. Cross here. So recently, the mysterious Mr. Enter uploaded a review of The Legend of Korra Book 1. The mysterious Mr. Enter, if any of you don't know, he's a cartoon critic on YouTube who has a series called Animated Atrocities, and he did not like The Legend of Korra. He made a 50-minute video basically reviewing all of Book 1. Before we begin, I want to make this completely clear in case he watches my video, because he's a pretty cool guy. I like Mr. Enter. I like most of his reviews. I've been watching him for several years. My girlfriend has been watching him since he made My Little Pony videos back in like 2012 or something. So do not think that this is a personal attack. However, I disagreed with every single point that he made in the entirety of his 50-minute review, with one exception being that the love triangle was terrible. Now, one more thing before we begin. I also hate The Legend of Korra. It is nowhere near my favorites. I'm not defending it out of any sort of fanboy desire to see my favorite show untouched. I hate it for other reasons, and there is a possibility that I might actually review all of Book 1 myself after this is done, to bring up the valid complaints that I have, because otherwise it would just seem like I'm about to spend several videos defending it. It's also probably going to take me more than one video to actually respond to this. You should include every single point that you disagree with and respond to each of them on their own. That way you can't misconstrue the opponent's argument or say that he said things he didn't. In the past, I've usually shown the full video that I'm responding to, because I typically don't respond to videos unless I disagree with at least 90% of what they say. So without any further ado, because this was kind of a long introduction, let's go ahead and jump right in. He spends the first 3 minutes of his video doing an introduction to his review of The Legend of Korra. I am going to skip through that, so it is going to sort of start in the middle of a sentence. His introduction bled into his review over the course of about 3 or 4 words. I did not exactly have a good place to start without starting at the very beginning of his video, so I do apologize for the abrupt beginning. He brings up in the first 3 minutes, he wants people to believe that he's at least genuine with his points. He brings that up during the first 3 minutes. So I will say right now, I genuinely believe that he is being genuine with his points, okay? I do believe that he is not just saying things to hate Legend of Korra to try and get some shock value views, okay? I will give you that benefit of the doubt. I think that's only fair so long as you also give me the same benefit of the doubt if you watch this video. All of my points and all of my complaints with your points that you raise up are genuine. I'm not doing this to try and piggyback off of a bigger YouTuber and try and get views off of his video. Little other note is that the original video was taken off of YouTube at the time of me filming this, so I had to use a mirrored video that somebody else had uploaded after his got taken down.
Frequent storytelling and world-building blunders. When I say world-building blunders, I don't mean that it's different from the first. I mean the terms that this doesn't logically make sense in the world that you've created. A lot of people don't like the 1920s aesthetic, but I didn't mind it too much. I could see it easily working. There are only 2 times when it really got distracting though. Number 1 is these radio-style introductions. I'm going to be blunt. I hated these vehemently, and they were constantly a pain to deal with.
Republic City is at war! After discovering that her father, Hiroshi Sato, is working with the enemy, Asami turns against him. And following another defeat at the hands of the Equalists, Lin Beifong resigns as chief of police. With the Equalist army growing stronger, who will help the Avatar stop Amon and restore balance to the city?
I get what they were trying to do. Create the impression of a world gripped by radio, and showcase the aesthetics of the world. The problem, like much of Korra, is that there is no logical follow-through with the choices that they've made.
See, this is the very first point that I disagree with. In The Legend of Korra, there is follow-through for the radio. Not only is there follow-through, but the radio at the end of the episode is actually payoff for something that's established in the second episode. In the second episode, it's shown that people are constantly listening to the pro-benders in the radio, and it's also shown that that's how they get their news. Korra actually gets into the pro-bending thing so much because of how she was listening into it on the radio throughout her entire life. The radio at the end of the episode with the same announcer that was already telling the news is actually the follow-through in itself to one of the design choices. Not only that, but it's aesthetically fitting in with the actual themes and nature of the world and the show itself. It's a 1920s theme, so it's using 1920s styled methods of communicating information. It completely fits with every single bit of the world building that they've done so far in your own example. It is the follow-through, and it does lead to something. Legend of Korra actually did go one step further and incorporate it into their world and give it meaning. So I think you're wrong here. It does have follow-through, and it is the follow-through.
This is the most consistent problem with the show. For the past 50 years, in the real world, this kind of serialized radio talk has been literally mocked and parodied, and has never been used seriously.
Watch a single episode of Welcome to Night Vale, and my point is made for me. That is all.
There is no way to take it dramatically seriously on any level.
But you can't fault a show for your inability to take something that everyone else in the world takes seriously. It is not the show's fault that you can't get parodies of what they're doing out of your head. They are doing something that is authentic. They are doing something that fits the time period, fits the world, actually affects things in show in episode 2 and any other time that they're listening to the radio. Can't remember off the top of my head if they listen to the radio at any other points, to be honest. But it's not the show's fault. It's your fault. Let me ask you this. If you were to sit down and play the game Cuphead, would you be unable to find any enjoyment out of it because old 40s bounce animation has been made fun of before and parodied? Because if so, then once again, that is your inability to separate things.
When I hear an introduction to a Korra episode, it makes me feel like I'm watching some cowboy cartoon from the 1950s, or a superhero show from the 1960s. Something incredibly corny, and done for no other reason than to entertain small children.
Dude, that is actually one of the points as to why they did it. That is one of the actual design choices. That is how cartoons were done back in that time period. And The Legend of Korra is a cartoon for children. They're accenting their world while at the exact same time presenting children with something that they would have never seen or heard of before in a way that's serious enough to be dramatic, flashy enough to keep children who would normally just skip past the introductions interested, and unique enough to them that they could say that they've never seen anything like that and attribute something to The Legend of Korra, which as they get older, they would come to sort of admire more because they realize where they took their sources from and the little touches of authenticity they added in to make the world come alive more.
Every time an episode left me off with a dramatic ending, these radio introductions would just plunge the whole thing right into the realm of ridiculous. Sure, it fits with the 1920s, but in every other way it doesn't fit with the show.
What other ways are there? You gonna explain that to us, or just pretend that you said that there were other reasons why it doesn't fit?
The other problem with the 1920s aesthetic for me is when they had a flashback to decades ago, and the story of the most infamous gangster that the city had ever had. Even though gangsters is a 1920s thing. Sure, it uses a horse thing and buggy to get away, but it doesn't create a connection between the relatively feudal technology seen in the original, and the more modern tech seen in Korra.
Alright guys, let's sing the bullshit song. You know the lyrics. Bullshit! Alright, snarkiness aside, here's why that point is objectively wrong. Okay, so he says that there was relatively feudal technology seen in the original show. Well, I don't really know about you guys, but I seem to remember the Fire Nation having a literal army of tanks, airships, like better than actual Zeppelin airships with reinforced military weaponry. I seem to remember them having gigantic drills able to destroy entire areas. No, the first one did not have relatively feudal technology. Instead, what it actually had was a period of 100 years where only one nation that was basically in charge of the entirety of the world and subjugated other nations to their whim kept technology exclusively to themselves and used it to power weaponry, which is why the weaponry in that show was so advanced, but the rest of the world's tech wasn't. See, it would work like that in actual history. If say Britain dominated the entirety of Europe and owned every single country and subjugated them instead of turning them into Britain, then they would have used the Industrial Revolution as a way to stimulate their own economy and build their own weaponry. This is basically how things like battleships come to be. The person with the higher military technology is the winner, and when one person is in control of all of it, then they get all of it, which is why the rest of the world looks so feudal. In fact, you can even see a technology disparity if you take a look at the Earth Nation compared to the Water Nation. The Water Nation had tools to perfectly shape every single thing that they were doing, whereas the Earth Nation was based off of, in what I can gather, basically peasant China. In fact, if you take the Northern Water Nation and compare it to the Southern Water Nation, you'll even see the disparities there due to the Fire Nation. See, the Fire Nation was dominating the Southern Water Tribe. They sent all of their warriors just to be able to barely help, and that was one ship. The Fire Nation could have clearly leveled that place at any given second, and clearly had been there and done damage before, hence, the actual battleship. Whereas the Northern Water Tribe had remained free during the entirety of the war. It was an independent nation that had resisted the Fire Nation because of tactical advantages. That's why the Northern Water Nation was so far advanced. So no, the original did not have feudal technology. It had realistic technology. And also, I don't know if you remember in the first one, but they already had gangster-like thugs that were in the Earth Nation. It completely makes sense that after the war has died down and everything is in chaos, these thugs would organize themselves into gangs because they already had the technology to do so. Jet himself was a gangster, basically, and had the war been over and had the term sprung up even once from one person, he could have been labeled a gangster. Just because in our world the term gangster didn't come until like the 1920s doesn't mean that it couldn't have been that way in the fantasy world where tanks existed before light bulbs. And one of the bigger reasons why the technology would have been so greatly accelerated to begin with, if you would consider it feudal, why the Earth Nation would already have technology, is because the actual magic, the bending that they use in their world, would be an incredible accelerator to the way that technology was developed. The moment they had a few inventors, and, by the end of the Avatar original series, a couple of the inventors, who were strictly used for creating weapons for the Fire Nation, remember the guy from the Air Temple? He would have been allowed to start using his creations and his intelligent mind to power up the technology that they already have to increase living conditions, which it doesn't technically state that that's what happened, but it can basically be inferred that that's what happened.
But these are small potatoes. It's very hard without going into a full lecture on world building to explain why much of this doesn't work.
And enter, if you're watching this and you have made it this far and you understand that I'm not attacking you, I would genuinely, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, I would love for you to give me a lecture on what you view world building as, because so far we disagree on every aspect of what world building is, and we're both writers. So I feel like there's got to be some sort of middle ground somewhere, you know what I mean? I kind of want to pick apart what you would say on how world building works.
So I'm going to give you a micro example to help showcase a macro problem with the series. On its own, you could probably get away with this, but it's mixed with several other things like it. The plate armor that the city police force uses. From a world building and a writing standpoint, this is stupid. From every angle, this is stupid. They probably included it because, hey, it looks cool, and it's something different, which is something that you learn to grow out of very, very soon when you learn how to world build. But they probably said, the police officers are metal benders, so it makes sense. But when you get down to it, when you think of it with the scrutiny expected from the Avatar franchise, this doesn't make sense in any way that you look at it. Okay, metal bending is more common now. We'll put that to the side for now. But it's safe to say that you have a significant chance of now running into an opponent with the metal bending ability. It would be an absolute shame if that person wanted to, I don't know, toss a police officer around like a rag doll. Or better yet, send the metal armor inward, crushing the police officer. Lightning bending is now common enough for people to turn it into a reliable job at a power plant. Both metal bending and lightning bending are now more common. And doesn't plate armor conduct electricity? On top of that, plate armor is specifically bad at one thing, going against people with flamethrowers. Despite what Spyro the Dragon says, if metal is continually exposed to flame, the skin on the other side is going to get burned, or if the fire is especially hot, the skin will fuse to the metal. An Avatar exists in a world where a sizable portion of the population is born with built-in flamethrowers. The metal armor simply doesn't work as armor any way you slice it.
Okay, how do I put this in a way that's respectful and polite? Every single thing you just said in that entire rant was wrong. Every single word that came out of your mouth, with the exception of metal conducting electricity and fire being bad against raw metal, every other word you just said was wrong. Let's get into this, because this point is going to take a long time. So let's go ahead and use a micro example from Mr. Enter's video to explain a macro problem with Mr. Enter's video. Do you see what I did there? Alright, I'm gonna start off by asking this. How patronizing do you have to be to sit there and say that the writer's purpose was, don't worry, it's just to look cool, and completely believe that there was no other thought process into giving them the armor other than it looks cool? Because literally just by the basic appearance of the armor alone, if you were to open your eyes and look at the screen, you would see that there are a lot of different pads and layers to that armor. You know that black stuff that separates the different plates on their body? That isn't magical void material that leads into several black holes and just doesn't have gravity for some reason. That's padding. That's a part of armor. You were patronizing, so I was patronizing. To start off, I'll say this. It does look cool. It looks fucking awesome, and you know it. There. I've addressed that it looks cool, since that's what you believe the only reason the authors had for putting that metal armor on the metal benders was. Now, let's get into the actual part of this argument, okay? No, it is not stupid. It is not stupid in the least. It is not a failure of world building. It is not an oversight. There are no problems with it. Alright, so let's start dissecting your points one by one. Let's start with the point about getting attacked by another metal bender. The show very explicitly states that Toph Beifong taught her daughter who taught the police force. The only people who know how to metal bend right now are the police. And yes, I'm sure out there there might be one or two other earthbenders who have learned how to do it, which means the actual premise of running into another metal bender is so minuscule and laughable that it is a non-issue. In real life, soldiers on the battlefield wear bulletproof vests, but oh my god, anti-tank rifles exist. Those can shoot through metal. What's gonna happen if they aim the anti-tank rifles at them? No armor is completely perfect. The amount of metal benders in the world is clearly under 0.2%. Random number, I don't know where I'm getting that from. But it's such a minuscule amount that it is a complete and total non-issue. Now, let's talk about the things that the metal armor is good for. The metal armor is resistant to slashing from water bending. And yes, water bending does have sword-like cutting effects. See the episode with the drill in the original series. A basic water bender, not even a master, can use a water blade, basically. That metal armor protects against the water blades, which gives them the inherent advantage over water benders. The metal armor would reduce the actual impact from a rock. Now, granted, it's not going to be perfect. Maces can still take down someone with plate armor, but I'd rather get a mace stuck into a helmet or stuck into a chest piece than directly into my skull or heart. Therefore, earthbenders are another thing that the armor is inherently useful towards. Waterbenders can also control ice. Ice would have a piercing effect. Metal would be inherently more useful versus ice too, so there's another reason why it's more useful against waterbenders. Now, it's more useful to airbenders for basically the same reason it's more useful to earthbenders. Also, there are even less airbenders than there are metal benders, so encountering somebody with airbending again is a non-issue. The only ones that exist is one peaceful monk, the Avatar, and 3 children being raised and taught by that one peaceful monk. So airbending doesn't even have to factor into the equation here. So already out of the 4 major bending styles, off of your logic alone, it is ultra effective against 2 of them. What armor would you suggest? What armor would you put on your soldiers that can be effective against all 3 of the elements without any inherent penalties whatsoever? Would you put wood on them? Because wood cracks under a small rock. It would rupture the very first time an earthbender got their eyes on them. Would you use a gambeson style armor? Because the moment somebody waterbended, it would cut through the gambeson and kill them. Also, it would be inherently more susceptible to rocks since it's basically just hitting right into your flesh. Wooden armor and gambesons are completely out of there, which leaves only some sort of metal armor. Now, once again, metal benders are such a non-issue that this isn't a thing. Now, if you were to use wood against a firebender, the wood would just catch on fire and roast you from the inside out. If you were to use a gambeson on a firebender, the cloth would catch on fire and it would roast you from the inside out. See, here's the thing. Firebenders are the most physically powerful people. There is no armor possible that could defend against a firebender. So why is it an issue? And also, I would like to point out that underneath the layers of plate was at least one full layer of padding and some sort of underarmor. The underarmor is there specifically so that fire wouldn't fuse to the skin. You don't just wear plate armor and nothing underneath it. Could you just imagine how badly that would chafe? Jesus fucking Christ. The point about lightning benders, it's slightly more of an issue, and one that I understand. But once again, how would you get around that? It's a non-issue. There's no armor in the world that would protect against lightning. Though there are a lot more lightning benders now, I'll admit to that. Lightning bending has become commonplace. They use it to fuel their technology. So there is a significantly more increased chance you'd run up to a lightning bender. And yes, metal conducts electricity. Also, the lightning is a directed straight line that doesn't follow regular lightning rules. The lightning is magical and is shot out in a directed line that you control yourself. And it also moves very slowly compared to real lightning. So the lightning really is a non-issue because there's no way to defend against it naturally whatsoever. The lightning also needs an actual source in this show. Even down in the electricity plants, they're funneling electricity to help fuel things. So the electricity really is a non-issue. The amount of times that a metal bender would go up against a lightning bender that has access to the lightning that he needs and is faster than the metal bender, which as we see are trained incredibly specifically to be athletic, to be quick moving, to have little fucking grappling hooks to zip around so that they're never caught, to be skilled with their metal bending, it would be a non-issue. This is something that does not matter. So let's review where the metal armor is and is not effective. The metal armor is not effective against other metal benders, an entity that do not exist. And if you were to come up against a stray metal bender, you can bet your sweet ass they'd have another way to take them down. The metal bending is not that effective against lightning benders. Something that requires an actual source, must be in a specific straight line, cannot be controlled very well, and is very hard to actually get to shoot where you want, moves slower than lightning, and is completely dodgeable. So again, the lightning bending thing, not really a big deal. So yeah, no, it's weaker to metal and lightning. The two bendings that you have the least of a chance to encounter aside from blood, which does not count. It protects you against fire bending because it's not going to fuse to your skin, it's not going to burn a hole through you, there are padding underneath it to protect you against it, and using the skilled martial arts techniques that the metal benders have, they'd more than likely be able to stop the fire bender from inflicting any real damage. Don't forget, unlike earth or water, fire bending is melee, it's close ranged, it's harder to shoot it at a range without it being extremely slow. Remember the battleships when they were firing the different fire blasts up at Appa when he was flying away? It gets slower the farther it shoots away, and that was something that they used in the show very cleverly. So if the metal bender has an even slight distance on the fire bender, then the fire bending isn't really going to do shit to him. So once again, plate armor, it's more effective against fire bending than being naked, or having a gambeson, or wooden armor, or whatever else you'd use. It's ultra effective against earth bending, it's ultra effective against sand bending, it's ultra effective against water bending, ice bending, air bending, and every other goddamn type of bending on the world, besides the three that, for all intents and purposes, don't exist on the battlefield except for in extremely rare situations. And no character in the firebending army so far has been shown to be as strong as Azula, who was the only character so far besides Iroh who has been able to summon lightning at will. And I'm actually pretty sure that that was just blue fire. I would actually have to go back and rewatch the scene because it's been a few years, you know what I mean? There was the micro problem explained in Mr. Enter's video. Now I'll go ahead and explain why that's actually a macro problem with the way that he has done this entire review. See, Mr. Enter, if I'm going to go off of what you say here, you're not a good world builder. You don't know what goes into world consistency. You don't understand what the functions of things are besides their base appearance. You don't understand what author's intent is for how to put things into a world. You don't understand how to use the actual abilities that are in that world and relate it to what they would be doing. And you don't understand how to take real life physics and apply them in a world with magic. You're not a good world builder. And the entirety of the first 10 minutes of your video is harping on the world building, none of which, not one thing you name, is even a semblance of a problem besides the phrase, "Well, I personally dislike it." Jesus Christ, that was a mouthful. That went on way longer than it should have, and it was way too serious, and now I'm mad. I'm gonna go look at a cat.
You get off that leash. That's not a play toy. We can't take you out for a walk if you're gonna play with the leash. He's gonna follow it right outside. Oh.
To put this in perspective, it would be like a fantasy world using gold as currency, and then figuring out that mages have the ability to just pull gold out of thin air. That makes what is considered money no longer valuable. and it completely goes against the original idea of the very concept.
That's a false equivalency. You're comparing armor, which is at the bare most absolute minimum effective against 50% of the entire world's benders, to wizards being able to create money out of thin air. That is not an actual comparison. Now see, going with your point, if I were to make an actual comparison, I'd compare it to knowing that you're about to go face an entire army of archers and then only wearing chainmail. That's an actual comparison. Wizards being able to create money out of thin air is not a comparison to armor. It just doesn't function whatsoever. There's absolutely no point that you can draw between there. If somebody can explain his metaphor in a way that's genuinely coherent, please leave it in the comments, because I don't get it. I don't get what he was trying to say there. It is just totally devoid of logic.
It looks cool is not a significant reason to keep something in a fantasy world.
You're a patronizing shit. Don't be such a fucking faggot. I feel validated insulting you because you insulted the writers. If you get mad at me for patronizing you, just remember you're doing it. Don't be a fucking hypocrite.
I understand that this may sound unbelievably anal.
Haha, you said anal.
But you have to understand that Avatar The Last Airbender, and by extension Korra, isn't like most other cartoons. It's fantasy. And on top of that, Lord of the Rings style fantasy, not Dungeons and Dragons style fantasy.
I'm not entirely certain what kind of distinction he thinks he's making here, but Dungeons and Dragons fantasy was based directly off of Lord of the Rings fantasy, especially if you look at the first, second, and third editions. Also, Lord of the Rings had its own RPG game with equally as crazy things that happen in it. D&D might be a game where you go and face a Lich King. The barbarian activates rage to give himself super buff damage while the wizard controls the cosmos. But in Lord of the Rings, the, say, fire demon literally rose up out of a volcano filled with tiny green monsters and then battled a wizard who was powerful enough to control the heavens, and then getting killed by the giant red fire demon only made him more powerful. Lord of the Rings is high fantasy. D&D is high fantasy. The distinction between the two is very, very small. Especially if you take a look at the Silmarillion. Read the Silmarillion and then try and tell me that Lord of the Rings history isn't just as, if not more silly than Forgotten Realms history. Silly not being a bad word here.
In this specific subgenre of fantasy, when you make something like this, you're trying to build a very consistent internal world.
Which it did very well by the examples you've shown us.
Everything plays into everything else. This isn't like SpongeBob or Ed, Edd n Eddy where you can establish something in one episode and have it never come back.
Korra. Oh, Korra, on the other hand, it gave its soldiers metal armor. How fucking dare they? How fucking dare they? I can't even fucking imagine what was going through the goddamn writer's mind. Fuck them, it looks cool. Oh, man, the fucking metal armor, they only put it there because it looks cool. Jesus Christ, man.
When you establish something in Avatar The Last Airbender or Korra, it's there. It is a part of the world, and it needs to relate to everything else. The illusion here is exceedingly fragile. Yes, it is very difficult to pull off, but when you succeed, you create something amazing. It is why many people are drawn to fantasy in the first place. They want worlds that they can be thoroughly invested into. The Legend of Korra's world is built a lot like a haphazard stack of blocks. Whenever they thought something was cool, they'd add it, not caring how it would affect the tower as they climbed up.
But you have to actually provide an example of that happening in the goddamn show. All you've said so far, the only example that you've shown was that they had metal armor. And that point is so thoroughly wrong that it took me about 10 full minutes to explain every single goddamn reason why what you said was wrong. All you're doing right now is blowing out your ass, not providing any goddamn backup to what you're saying. You're not being a critic. You're not even being a goddamn YouTube commenter, because at least the majority of the ones that I've seen are smart enough to understand that when they say something, they have to back it up by at least one example. You have not given us one example. In fact, one of the things you said earlier, something you disliked, the whole 1920s radio show thing, actually directly goddamn lends credit to the whole Legend of Korra keeps everything internally consistent thing. Your own arguments are hurting your own arguments, you patronizing little faggot. But nah, it looks cool though.
In a fantasy show like this, everything needs to build into everything else. In the original series, because earthbending exists, people are able to use earthbending to create massive trains and transportation systems, moving mail in baskets all around cities.
And in Legend of Korra, because of their ability to manipulate electricity, they're able to come up with extreme technological accomplishments very quickly. But spoiler alert, he's going to complain about the lightning bending later. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say that they're not doing enough cool, consistent things that are possible with the magic and interesting to look at, but then anytime something happens, you tell them that it's fucking stupid. You can't say that the armor looks stupid when it's internally consistent, very clever, and has a lot of fucking uses.
Let me put it like this. The original established the concept of the Agni Kai, which is basically when a firebender slighted another, they would challenge each other to a duel using firebending attacks. Now wouldn't it have been like really cool to have airbenders duel each other in a similar fashion? Well, regardless if it would look cool or not, it wouldn't fit into the world that was established, because the air nomads had a culture of peace and non-aggression. It wouldn't make sense with what has been established. You can't just write this as you go.
And you can't say that The Legend of Korra is doing this wrong by making blanket statements and providing no evidence to what you're saying. That is not how critique works in its fundamental nature.
You need to have the end of episode 12 planned before you even start on episode 1. And them just making shit up on the spot is a constant problem throughout the series. Metal prisons were frequently used in the original because until the middle of book 2, metal bending didn't even exist. Why are prisons still using metal in Korra? Sure, not everyone can do it, but in the original, metal was often used because the villains could be 100% certain that no one would ever be able to get through them. Then again, I suppose this could work if every single metal bender in Republic City was forced by law to be a police officer and then brainwashed Bossing Say style to be completely obedient.
Alright, at this point it has to be one of three things. One, you have to have not actually watched the show, looked at any of the subtext, looked at any of the in-your-face text actually. You have to not actually have watched the show. You have to be retarded, or you have to be purposefully trying to find things you don't like. The metal prison example might actually be as dumb as the armor. Okay, as aforementioned, metal bending was specifically taught to a select few by the one person who was able to use it. There is nothing in the series which goes to show us that metal bending has become widely spread outside of the police force. It's not exactly like every earthbender Joe Schmuck off the fucking streets is a master metal bender. It's a trained art. It's trained to the police officers. It's not that they have metal bending and then are manipulated into becoming it. Watching the show would tell you that. For fuck's sake. Watching book 1 would tell you that. Here is why the metal prison is not stupid. Buckle yourselves in, this might be a fucking long one. Okay, I'm gonna start off with the question kind of similar to what I asked during the metal armor thing. What would you use aside from a metal prison? Would you put your prisoners in wood? Because, firebenders, earthbenders, and waterbenders would have a very easy time breaking out of there. Would you put them in a sand prison? Because that's called a desert, and quicksand kills people. Would you put them in a water prison? Because then you'd have to have waterbenders constantly putting up the water. Or would you just bind and gag and then blindfold all of them, violating all of your human rights? The only possible fucking way for it to, work is a metal prison. Now, if one of the cops turned evil and then started committing crimes, then yes, I am very sure that they would have to find another way to control him. And I, for the life of me, only have one way that might even be possible, and that's up in a blimp or something, or a sky ship. There is absolutely zero other possibilities that do not take away or abuse human rights. And if you're saying that they should start abusing prisoners' human rights in a children's show because there's that 0.fuck-all% chance that they're a metal bender who isn't a police officer, then I think you are evil and you should stay away from fucking children's shows because clearly you do not understand human rights or what is humane. The metal prisons are the only fucking sensible option. If you see this video, please, for the fuck of Christ, tell me what you would have made the prisons out of that doesn't violate human rights or require people to constantly be doing it. That wouldn't require people to constantly be standing there, bending non-stop to create a fucking water orb over somebody. Jesus Christ, you tried to make one more point to back up what you were saying, and it just makes your point look even dumber. It makes it look like you don't understand things even further. Do you have any idea how this would work? Do you think they have a magic fucking otherworldly force field bender who can just create force fields over whoever they want and they just stay there permanently. You literally go from in one sentence basically saying like, oh, this needs to have internal consistency and be realistic. Oh, this needs to follow the same laws that the rest of the series has always followed. And then you immediately turn around and bitch about it having internal consistency and following the same laws that both the real world follow and the Avatar series followed. Nobody fucking metal bends, and those that do, I'm sure would have another way of concealment. I'm getting heated now because you're a critic, a YouTuber who I generally very much respect on his opinions. I consider you to be an intelligent person. Hell, part of the way that I review movies was literally fucking based on how you do your videos. Just look at my Harry Potter reviews and tell me that it isn't reminiscent of the way that you review things. That is why I am so fucking angry at your sheer idiocy here. You're being a complete fucking retard, and you're not that. You're a very intelligent person, so how you can be thinking like a goddamn 4-year-old who doesn't want to eat broccoli because their big brother doesn't want to eat broccoli, so they're fabricating random ass fucking reasons to hate broccoli, I just don't understand. Did you just drink some of Jim Jones's fucking Kool-Aid earlier, and now you're just waiting until it kills you? Are you taking so many drugs that you can't fucking see straight? Or are you just naturally this stupid and managed to just get lucky 250 plus episodes in a row? Alright, and I am going to say this before I go any further. I am aware of the Metal Clan, okay? I am fully aware of it. But that is not in Book 1. They are not in Republic City, okay? Going off of the show's logic and what the show has said, right? About 1 in 5 people are benders, okay? Now, out of that, there's a 1 in 4 chance that you can be an earthbender. And according to the show, there's about a 1 in 100 chance that you can be a metal bender. That is on the Avatar wiki. That is official. You do understand what that means, right? If about 20% of people are benders, 5% of those benders are earthbenders, and 5% of that 5% are metal benders. That is 0.025% of the population in Avatar have metal bending. Are you really going to change the entirety of your whole prison system based on 0.025% of your population, the majority, the giant majority of which do not even live in your city?
But as far as I could tell, that didn't happen. And it's basically them assuming that, gee golly gosh, we could never run into a metal bender or a firebender or a lightning bender that wanted to hurt the police.
These are small details. Don't you think you're nitpicking just a little?
It's not nitpicking at all. It's just him being wrong about all those small details.
Bit of a double standard, but yes, if we were talking about most other cartoons, this would be insanely nitpicky. Avatar is different. It is a very rare genre in Western animation, high fantasy. Avatar is a franchise that rewards the keen eye. Let me put it this way. With Avatar: The Last Airbender, the more that you pay attention to, the more that you notice, the better it becomes. Of course, they make a mistake here and there, like not explaining what happened to Jet.
What? What the fuck?
You did not just say that. You did not just say that, dude. How the hell? Jet died. Jet fucking died, enter. It was left ambiguous on purpose. They purposefully didn't say what happened to Jet because it was a children's show and main characters aren't supposed to just die like that. It was left ambiguous so the audience wondered what happened to him. And then the scene with Smellery, you know, the, oh, Jet's fine episode. That was meant to be sad. Jet very clearly died in a very ambiguous way, as was the actual fucking... You missed the point. You missed the point behind the entirety of Jet's character. It's like you completely didn't understand the entirety of his character, the entirety of what revolved around his death. You are sitting here saying that there's inconsistencies in the Legend of Korra, and that's bad. But don't worry, the original Avatar wasn't perfect because it didn't tell us what happened to Jet. The character with an ambiguous ending, heavily implying he was killed in a horrible, tragic moment that completely, his ambiguous death completely established the point of his character being in the narrative. But that went over your head. That completely went over your head. That's not a fault from the original Avatar: The Last Airbender. If anything, the way they handled Jet's death is a giant fucking bonus. Any other show would have had him alive and had him at Smellerby's side when they met him again. But this show didn't. It left it ambiguous and then never showed him again. because he's dead. All I have to say is you missed the point, man.
But most often, that is the case. This is a good thing. It is what truly great media does. On the first watch through, you might notice the story and the characters. In the second watch through, you'll notice more obscure details that end up coming back later. On the third watch through, though, you see every nuance and every emotion poured into each frame of the character interactions, and the subtle inflections in the voice. The more that I watched The Legend of Korra, it seemed like the less that I got out of it. Actually, that's not entirely true. The more things that pissed me off, I got out of it.
Well, quite frankly, that's a meaningless statement. Because after the things you've gotten pissed off about so far, I don't think you watched the show, to be honest. I would rather believe you didn't watch the show than believe that these are your genuine opinions, man. Because that kind of makes me sad.
But if you don't want to talk about little details, fine. There are larger world-building blunders. I have to say this. These are very, very rookie mistakes that I could not believe they actually made. Let's talk about pro-bending. Pro-bending is nothing more than a continual drain on the series and a waste of time. I feel like the only reason that this is in here is because they wanted to make Korra not stereotypical in a very stereotypical way. She's a tomboy, and every single tomboy ever needs to play sports.
Yeah, how dare they ever add any sort of world building into this show that you say they don't do enough proper world building with. However, would that ever lead into a good thing?
A lot of people say that pro-bending is essentially Quidditch. I disagree. There is one major difference between pro-bending and Quidditch.
Pro-bending isn't fundamentally broken at its very core and actually functions like a real sport?
I actually know how Quidditch is played!
Oh.
At no point does this show explain the rules, even the main rules, of pro-bending.
What? Yes, it does.
At first, it seems like the goal is to get the opponents knocked over the back edge. But apparently, no, you can win rounds by doing something, I don't know. Sometimes the round ends in a draw and I have no idea why. And by the time the championship rolls around, it really does feel like they're pulling fouls out of their ass and literally making up the rules as they go. Yes, in a sports film like Remember the Titans or Angels in the Outfield, they don't explain how the sport is played. This is because they can assume that you know how the sport is played in the real world before going on, as it's probably why you're interested in the movie in the first place. This is also why many people have a hard time liking sports, video games, or movies, because they don't explain. However, you can't get away with that in something like Avatar, because you can't know how pro-bending works because it's not a real sport. It doesn't exist in the real world. In Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or Philosopher's Stone for those of you who use the metric system, both the book and the movie, they dedicate some time to explaining the basic rules on how to play. If Harry catches the snitch, he wins. And he can even get beat up and thrown into a wall and they're still not pulling fouls out of their ass. If Korra does, I have no idea, she wins, maybe. And if she does random actions like walking over a line or throwing things at someone's head despite them trying to get points by throwing things at each other, then she gets fouls, I guess.
Oh my god, if we could harness the amount of hot air you were blowing out of your ass, we could have methane power forever. Let's go ahead and unpack that statement again, just like we did with the armor and the prison. To start, I will say that over on my Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets review, I explained all the reasons why Quidditch is fucking horrible. Might have been in my Sorcerer's Stone video. Watch them all anyway. Wink. Quidditch is a horrible sport, fundamentally broken to the core, and behaves like no real sport ever would or could or should. But since that took me, I think, over 10 minutes to explain the problems with Quidditch, I'm not going to attempt to do it again here. I am going to say, right off the bat, that pro-bending is extraordinarily simple. I can tell you how pro-bending works. The show does not need to sit there and give you a 10-minute long explanation, plus the field book, plus the playing manual, plus all the rules, plus every single individual fucking aspect in the list of all of the major players and every single thing that could ever be associated with pro-bending fucking ever, because the show assumes you have the intelligence of a 4-year-old and are able to watch the screen and figure out what is going on. They did not pull the fouls out of their ass. And as for the hitting them in the head comment, in MMA fights, you're supposed to do whatever you can to win, but you're still not supposed to punch people in the fucking balls. In boxing, you're allowed to do whatever you can to win, but you're not allowed to kick. You see, sports have rules, and when you're chucking giant rocks at people's heads, that can literally one-shot snap their necks. That is why no headshots is a rule. As for the fouls about stepping over the line, the show clearly establishes the line of scrimmage or the line of conquest or the line of go fuck yourself, however you want to say it. If you step over that line and all three opponents haven't been pushed back yet, then that's a foul because you're invading the enemy territory without actually pushing them back and getting the advantage. You can win by knocking someone off, but you can also win by getting everybody over to the very last line because it's basically impossible to defend themselves at that point. The whole line of conquest thing gives advantages to the players who are winning. You push back the enemy team and you're allowed to move up. The enemy team now has less space to dance around and less space to defend themselves, and thus becomes easier to throw over. If you throw an opponent over from the side, that does not count. That is a foul. All of this stuff is extraordinarily clearly laid out, but for some reason you are unable to grasp the very basics of a sport that 6-year-olds understood, dude. Jesus Christ. The show assumes you have some intelligence. Maybe not that much. Maybe you can be a little bit of a moron, but the show assumes you're able to pay attention to the screen. See, if you paid attention to the screen, you would know that they established nearly every single one of these rules during the very first fight before Korra actually joined the team. They use the bad player to show how you can fall over the edge and get pushed back. They do explain all of this stuff. You just have to peel your eyes open and look at the screen for 5 minutes. I will say this. I was not that big of a fan of the pro bending scenes, but for other reasons. Not these retarded ones. This is horrible. Why are you trying to say that they didn't explain how the sport worked? They clearly did.
No joke. I've looked up wikias and supplementary materials, and I still don't know the basics of the game besides don't get flung off the back. But apparently you don't have to throw the opponents off the back to win the game. I'm spending so much time on pro bending because Season 1 spends so much time on pro bending. It takes up a good chunk of the first half of the season, and during any pro bending match, because you don't know how it's played, there is no tension.
No, you don't know how it's played. The rest of us weren't high as fuck when we were watching the show and understood how the sport worked after 4.5 fucking seconds of exposure to it.
And this is 1,000 times more true for the championship game, where the cheating is so blatant that even the announcer is admitting it.
Too far. That water had rocks in it. Knockout!
Oh, come on! Those were illegal headshots! Open your eyes, ref!
Well, folks, it's a controversial call, but the Wolfbats notch a nasty knockout to win the match.
And even if Korra and her team loses, there's going to be no effect because everyone is going to have a problem with this in-universe.
Once again, you're making me defend a show that I hate and a particular set of episodes that I hate. But that's the sort of thing that happens in real life. I'm just gonna go out and say it right now. Most sports games are rigged right out of the fucking gates. They already know who the victor is going to be, and cheating always happens. There's all sorts of controversial calls made all the time because clearly the other team is cheating to win. This happens all the time in real life. In fact, if you were going to try and critique this scene, then an actually valid critique would be that the narrator himself was calling out the illegal shots. The announcer would have been one of the very first people that got paid off. He would have spoken favorably about all the moves. And yes, a lot of people in-universe would have a problem with this. That happens in real life. That is a thing. That was a big trope from mafia movies. That was a big trope from gangster movies. And that is a trope that they're using in the Korra series. That is not a problem. That is a representation of real sports. I really hate how much you're making me defend The Legend of Korra. I fucking hate this show. It's basically like I'm sucking its dick now. Damn it, man.
The actual end result of it doesn't matter. Yeah, I guess I know who I want to win because Korra's the main character, and they do make the rivals assholes, but I don't know how she's supposed to be doing this, and it's just nothing. I could make a whole supplementary video about everything on the sport that confuses me. For instance, going over the line basically gives you a foul. But earlier in that episode, Mako wins his first match by going over the line and pushing everyone back. I'm sure that there's a reason, and the writers knew that reason, but goddamn if they could tell the audience what that reason is.
Alright, Mr. Enter, at this point you owe me a supplementary on world building and a supplementary on all the things on pro bending that doesn't make sense to you, alright, buddy? I expect it in 1 month. I want 5,000 word papers, MLA format, citations needed, please. Thank you very much. Second of all, they definitely explain that. They just really do. It's visual explanations. I imagine you'd be the very first person to cry out, "Show, don't tell," if they were to tell you the rules before the actual game. In fact, haven't I heard you critique things for the whole they tell you they don't show you thing in the past? Make up your mind.
But this is all okay because the winner doesn't matter. Every single second that we spend on pro bending doesn't matter. The final game ends up being completely rigged. The rival team completely drops out of the story.
What? They were not written out of the story. They had their fucking bending taken away. Jesus Christ, they weren't written out of the story. The story was over. That chapter of the fucking narrative had reached its end. It had climaxed. It had resolved. It was over. You are mad because the fucking pro bending team never actually came back after they had their bending taken away at the fucking national finals? Jesus Christ, you not understanding Jet's death is starting to make more and more sense. It's like you think a character should go on literally fucking forever despite their irrelevance to the plot now. The character had his purpose. He served his purpose. He was defeated, and now he's gone. You know, just like what happened to fucking Admiral Zhao or whatever his fucking name was from the original one. He was defeated. He was killed. He's gone from the story. Were you pissed off he didn't show back up in fucking book 2? Because that shows the clear level of understanding that you have so far. Okay, once again, I apologize. I'm heated because you're usually very intelligent. What they did with his character, what they did with the enemy team's character was called jobbing or jobbing. I've only actually read it. I apologize. I'm going to call it jobbing for now because that sounds cooler in my opinion. So jobbing is basically when you set up a villain, right? Establish that he is equal or around the power level of the main character, or even stronger than they are. Someone that is a legitimate challenge for the first act of the story. And then, at the end of the first act of the story, when the real villain shows himself, the true powerful badass, the BBEG, he defeats him in 1 or 2 hits incredibly quickly just to show, look, this guy isn't fucking easy. Whether or not I like this trope, it does not matter. He had his purpose for the story. They used the pro bending to establish villains who were very, very similar in power to Korra and her team, possibly even stronger, even better at their own game than they were. They were even cheaters who were willing to bend the rules. They had everything going from them. Then Amon shows up, and in under 5 minutes, they're basically akin to dead. They lose their bending. They have no power. You see what this villain does. He's a badass. He just defeated these guys with basically one hand. It's a narrative. There's a literal narrative fucking reason for it happening. Once again, this is not me saying that I liked it. This is me saying that he was not written out of the story. What you're saying is wrong.
And Amon comes in and ends the championship. So all of that time we spent with the Fire Ferrets getting funding and practicing and meeting the rival team ends up completely pointless. Like, from a narrative sense. It is literally wasted time.
What? No, it's not wasted time. It was an entire fucking chapter of the story. It is how Korra met her friends. It is how Korra learned how to fight with her friends. It was showcasing her friends' power. It's how they met the girl and how they brought her into the party. It establishes one of the villains. It leads up to things. If they hadn't been in the pro bending tournament, they wouldn't have needed all the money, which means that there wouldn't have been a fucking reason for them to be out working like that. Like, what the hell was your problem with all of this? It was a completely finished story chapter, and it did lead into things. Every single thing it set up during the pro bending arc, no matter how shitty it was or how little the payoff was, did lead up to something and did have narrative stakes and value.
Korra meets Mako and Bolin before it starts, and Amon ends it, and we already knew that he was gonna do some fucked up damage shit to the town. Either of these things anyway, we don't actually have to see a single game of pro bending played to know about within the story. I mean, there is a point where Hitoshi sponsors the team because Asami hit Mako with her motorcycle. Since giving a bunch of money is Hitoshi's first act on screen and his introduction, you know that he's gonna be a bad guy. I'm not even kidding, maybe this is just a writer thing, but him giving money as the first thing that he did was exactly how I knew that he was going to be a bad guy.
Okay, so whether or not that's an overused or a bad trope or something that I personally dislike, once again, doesn't actually matter to the overall picture. Take into consideration the age group, right? This is made for children, okay? And I'm trying to become an actual children's storybook author. I don't buy the, oh, it's for kids argument. But in this case, they're using a trope which kids would have pretty much never actually been exposed to. Not only that, but they do it in a way that actually is realistic. It's not like he was a random stranger on the road who came up to them while he was overhearing their conversation. His daughter hit them with her car. Now, if I were a big businessman trying to keep things personal, then I would be scared that the hood rat would try and sue my company for millions of dollars and not have a single chance of losing that lawsuit. So I would try and cut him a deal. And you know what? Giving him some money and sponsoring him is a pretty good deal compared to having the giant hit to his reputation, the giant hit to his daughter's reputation, and the getting sued. It's an overused trope, and it's not a very good one, but it can be used effectively. And for as much as I hate Legend of Korra, I would argue that that trope was used effectively. I mean, to be honest, my girlfriend did not even see it coming. She actually thought he was a good guy. I teased her about it, but that's how it was. So, yes, if you're a critic who spends his entire life studying every single trope, studying every single cliche, you'd have seen him being a bad guy. But if you're the 99.5% of the population that doesn't have an over-analytical mind, you would not have necessarily seen that coming. He was, for all intents and purposes, a clever Avatar villain. It's not exactly like Azula or the guy from Ba Sing Se or Admiral Zhao were incredibly super mega, immensely super deep complex characters you'd have never seen becoming a villain. It's not exactly like anybody but Zuko was all that good of a villain in Avatar. Sure, they were deep and better than most things, but, I mean, it wasn't Breaking Bad, let's be honest. Except for Zuko, because holy shit, Book 2, fuck you, Zuko.
It's a tactic from the perennial classic mystery series Scooby-Doo, and Hitoshi is a Scooby-Doo villain. This is seriously level 1. Have the guy that you want people to not know is the bad guy do something really obscenely nice as his very first act. In any other media, 9 times out of 10, he's probably the bad guy.
Okay, I'm just arguing to argue right now, but if you actually have watched much Scooby-Doo, that happens very little. I know it's weird that the trope got associated with Scooby-Doo, but for the most part, the Scooby-Doo bad guys are usually very much in the background or trying their absolute hardest to stop them from, like, going in. Like gatekeepers and shit. Or rowers, or it's usually people who don't have much to do with the story.
And the other 1 out of 10 times, he's the red herring. Going back to the Quidditch thing, Harry Potter did this a lot, which is probably why I'm cold to the whole thing. But let's talk about this money thing, because it's another thing where there is no logical follow-through. Bolin and Mako are pro-benders. However, pro-bending doesn't give them enough money to fund pro-bending, but they have no other job on the side. At the start, anyway. I'm singing, whoa, how the mighty fall, the mighty fall.
Did you even watch the fucking show? They were getting extorted. They were making ends meet. But then the guy told them that they needed to pay 40,000 eurons or whatever the fuck fake ass currency that this show has in order to actually fucking join the finals. He sprung it on them. They didn't need the money before that. Why would they have extra jobs? And also, as the show established, they fucking did. And it isn't exactly like getting into sports in real life is fucking free.
And apparently they have plenty of time since Korra has time to practice her airbending. What it ends up feeling like is that they're avoiding any sense of getting a job to spend their time and money that they don't have on nothing more than a hobby. I mean, if they were pro athletes and actually making a living off of this, then it would make sense, but in the end, no, it doesn't. How the mighty fall, the mighty fall. An apartment owned by the arena manager, but it really feels like it's not their best option and they could just look for another apartment and get out of this whole charade.
Yes, how dare they pursue their lifelong dream, even if they have to start off on the bottom and slightly get extorted. How dare they have to put forth a little bit of fucking effort to achieve all their passions. How dare they not be millionaires right off the bat, working 19 different jobs all at once, making all the money in the world before they're allowed any time to pursue their hobby. I'm sure the guy who makes YouTube videos for a living has never pursued his hobby. They're trying to become professional athletes. You don't become professional athletes by not doing anything athletic. Alright guys, here's where I'm gonna go ahead and call it an episode. I just realized that I'm almost at the 1 hour mark and I'm ready to blow my fucking brains out listening to this. This half of his video, like the first half of his video, is where he makes his smartest points. I don't know if this is gonna be 2 parts or 3 parts, but this This part of his video, the first 20 minutes that I had sit through, this was the smart half. It only goes downhill from here. So please stay tuned for part 2 because holy shit does it get bad. Oh, and Mr. Enter, if you're upset that I was like called you a faggot and called you a bitch and called you an idiot and all that shit, well, I'm a faggot, bitch, idiot, nigger too. So who the fuck cares? It's just words. Don't give them more power than they have. I'm pissed off at you. Alright, you piles of human excrement who aren't fit to hold a fucking camera. Cheers.
I'm singing.